Thank you.
Thank you very much and good afternoon to everybody. I will address the theme by explaining why I, as an engaged academic, have chosen Twitter for social media engagement format and why I recommend it to others as well. I treat engaged academic to me and somebody who is an academic and wants to pursue evidence-based, research-based approaches to public debate, but at the same time who wants to reach beyond academia. So there might be a policy interface or some other interface with non-academics. So research-based engagement with the world is what I see the term engaged academics to refer to. I will show you 5 PowerPoint slides by sharing my screen and try to run you through them within the remaining minutes. The first question is why to choose Twitter if you want to be an engaged academic. And in a positive sense, Twitter is an elite platform that you reach quite targeted specialist audiences who are professionals also in the use of the medium. So it's possible to get to actual discussions which are global in nature with not exactly those you want to, but a rather good subgroup of the people you would like to engage with, namely those who themselves are involved in Twitter. And I think that's a much better interface than, for instance, Facebook, which is quite random with whom you get to engage with. And also you will be flooded by all kinds of material of non-academic nature and comments and winding lengthy comments. Further, Twitter, interestingly, is, I think, the most gender neutral social media platform, so that the role of, for instance, academics women is quite big, and we are close to 50-50, and I see it including in my followers, that that's pretty stable at 50-50 gender balance. I like the 280 character space, which is the format of tweets, because it forces you to be concise. Of course, you can always post threads, but you don't want to do it too often. And then you can put as links, usually hyperlinks to websites, web pages, including your own writings or whatever you want to share. But you can also run a poll, or you can save some text in the format of a photo and thereby go beyond the 280 character limit. So it's a nice way of being concise, but nevertheless flexible at the same time. And finally, Twitter, I think, uniquely is compatible with many other platforms, so that, for instance, in my case, I don't have a blog of my own, and I don't write on one single blog, but about 6 different blogs, according to the theme and their interest. And then I find Twitter as being very suitable as a meta blog to link all those together, so that those who want will be able to find my blogs wherever they appear, blog posts wherever they appear. I don't think in today's world people will visit on a daily basis websites. When I started using the web, we had the habit of visiting those websites we needed, or we thought we need to do it on a daily basis. Nobody does that today. Rather, people tend to read their Twitter feed, or at least if they have kept their the number of people they follow at a limit, they will be able to follow their Twitter feed, and then you actually may reach your audience, because you hope that as many as possible of your followers actually go through their Twitter feed once a day. Next question. When you go to Twitter as an engaged academic, what will be your strategy as an academic, as an engaged academic? And my proposal is that you go through steps. The first one is you start using Twitter for your own research. You find out who are the interesting academics you want to follow, or what other sources of information there are, such as courts for a lawyer, international organizations, for lawyers or people in international relations, etc. You get to learn what's useful and where you hit the law of diminishing returns, where you should not expand the number of Twitter accounts you follow, but where you get enough information but are not overflooded. So that's step one. Step two is that you start sharing. You engage with Twitter as a discussion forum, and probably people you have decided to follow will learn to follow you if you have something meaningful to say in respect of their work. And then you start also sharing your own work, for instance, in the form of hyperlinks. And this can mean that Twitter becomes a publication channel for your own work, not actual publishing, but promoting your work through the publicity you get through Twitter. And then you move to stage 4, where you actually become an engaged academic, that you are promoting a specific project or a specific mission, perhaps an NGO, perhaps some important work you are doing in order to interact with the world, not only the academic world, but beyond the academia with the broader world. So that's the 1, 2, 3, 4 steps. And these steps and their order of priority result in quite different strategies. I'm warning against becoming an academic narcissist who promotes himself, herself to Twitter rather than the substance of one's work. And then another warning I want to give is that think about your time management. Twitter can be so captivating that you find it takes too much of your day, and ultimately you will get overloaded and you don't want to follow Twitter as intensively as you wanted originally. And therefore it's important to limit the number of accounts you follow to a reasonable number, which you can do, for instance, once a day. My Twitter strategy ultimately was to create a parallel Finnish language account. So I have now 2 accounts which have jointly over 11,000 followers. The English language one is the original for an international audience, and it's quite strictly academic or human rights professional, quite narrowly focused. And I try to avoid tweeting anything personal or even anything political, which is beyond my field of expertise. Whereas I then got into intensive fights with politically motivated people in my own country, Finland, and decided to create a parallel Finnish language account to fight with them more freely without burdening my proper Twitter account. So there I take more liberties to deal with human rights, constitutional law, politics, Finnish politics, and often it is the intersection of my actual professional field of academic expertise and politics. So themes such as discrimination and hate speech, climate change, indigenous peoples, discrimination issues become political also in my tweeting, and I don't mind, and I'm happy to do it. And this is then the two accounts I combine with active blogging, and the 2 accounts become kind of a meta blog where I then decide which ones to share with the Finnish audience and which ones with the international. Here's a comparison between the 2 Twitter accounts from follower Wonk, and it says my social authority in the English language account is 50, and in the Finnish one it's 61. The followers are pretty much at the same level, and they grow depending on what's the discussion that is currently ongoing. But interestingly, only 1,770 followers are common to the 2 accounts. It shows you how the strategy really affects who you are able to target, that people are selective and they don't want to follow both. They choose one or the other, or most people do. Then there is an intersection, an overlap of 1,770 people who follow both. Those social authority indexes, I don't know how they are exactly calculated, but it's interesting to know that the highest one is Barack Obama, who has 96. And then of EUI people, the director of the Schuman Center and the incoming director of the School of Transnational Governance, both Alexander Stubb, both have 80. So I'm at 61 on my Finnish account, and I consider it quite high as a social authority index. Of our departmental professors, I think Nicolas Petit from the law department with 60 has the highest social authority. As you see in the first line above that, institutional Twitter accounts often don't have the same social authority as individuals. And they tend to be quite bureaucratic, neutral, and boring. EUI Social Authority 60, Migration Policy Center 62, Schuman Center 60, School of Transnational Governance 44. So they are lower than the respective directors of those institutions, which tells you something how Twitter functions and how people actually want to see something personal and not simply plain information and distribution of materials. I close with some advice concerning Twitter fights. I have become an expert. First of all, beware of trolls. Don't feed the troll. Don't be hijacked by them. Don't compromise your own strategy and your own profile as to, for instance, what kind of language you use or the themes you want to cover. Don't allow yourself to be run by the trolls. Don't promote trolling, and often the answer is simply to ignore whatever they do. But if you do want to respond, you can, so to say, subtweet the trolls. So you don't refer to them, you don't publish their Twitter handle, you just say, I was asked to clarify whether, and then you tell what you actually think about the topic, but you don't refer to the troll. Other fights with non-trolls who may be academic or political real persons with some authority and big number of followers, engage selectively. And important is to know how to back out of a fight, and preferably early on. Often it's enough to respond once. And if you start engaging with in an ongoing fight, you may end up giving the impression that you are digging deeper, that you were already put in a corner, and now instead of backing out of the discussion, you dig your own grave deeper and deeper. Don't do that. Just present your own view, and that's it. And if somebody is not happy, let them go on forever. Finally, engaged academics unavoidably will get in Twitter fights. And that's one of the nuisances in Twitter, but it's partly because it's part of the reason why it's so engaging and exciting to be actively involved, that you get into discussions with, let's say, high-level politicians or other academics in another part of the world. You need thick skin if you want to be an engaged academic. So for some people, the recommendation is don't read your Twitter feed before going to bed. It's better to do earlier in the day when you have time to forget before you get to your evening rituals. There will be ad hominem attacks, maybe about something you did in the past, or where your family comes, or what your wealth is, or whatever. And there might be also direct threats. Quite often the threats will then come by email rather than on Twitter itself. People dig up your email address and send you threats. And there my response has been that I make it public, that I report them to the police if there are threats. And I think it has helped. Thank you.
Maybe in my experience as an advisor to academics on social media, I would like to take a step back compared to what Martin already presented with, which was already really hands-on on the use of Twitter. Because in my experience with in academia, there is still a lot of reluctance and a lot of resistance for people to get engaged on social media. And it's understandable. It's social media can be a pretty scary place, as Martin already also showed us in his last slide. You can get into fights, you can get into having nasty comments on your posts and so on and so forth. But at the same time, it's not possible any longer to just pretend that they don't exist. The social media are a very large space where people have conversations and interactions today. And politicians, journalists, and now also academics are more and more using social media. And Twitter, as Martin also showed us, is, I would say, probably the most suitable for academics. I keep on telling my colleagues the reasons why academics cannot avoid being on social media and should just go with it. And I just want to briefly mention the main three arguments for why we should just be in this space. The first reason is that in any case, but maybe I can also show you a couple of slides that I have prepared because it can help a little the presentation. So let me just quickly. So I'll go into, voila. You see it?
Yes, it's coming.
Okay. So, so the first reason for academics to be on social media, and you know, we can talk about the different types of social media, but in any case, I'm now using the general expression social media, is that even if you decide not to be there, you will be there anyway, because you will be quoted, you will be mentioned. Some people might be at a conference where you speak, or they can maybe make reference to your research anyway. So if you don't engage on this space, other people will talk about you anyway, and you will not be able to control the information. The second argument that I use with colleagues to persuade them is that, well, you know, I try to show all the advantages of using social media, which is this global, unprecedented global free space where we can access information easily, we can interact with people all over the world, we can have useful conversations that can help us in our research and in our work, daily work, and we should just take advantage of this space. And finally, the third one is, you know, what probably has already been discussed in other outreach cafes about the moral duty for academics to be there in order to counter misleading or fake news and information that is present a lot on social media. So there has to be also this kind of call for us to be and to speak. The most frequent reaction that I get is, I don't have time, I have already enough on my plate, I'm busy with more important things, and so on. And, you know, I want to just make reference to Bridget, who Martin just mentioned earlier, because Bridget Laffan, the director of the Robert Schuman Center, is probably my biggest success stories. She started to be on Twitter at the end of 2016 and under a suggestion that I made to her. And now today she has 15,000 followers. And her community of followers keeps on growing. She's engaged in conversations on Twitter on a daily basis, and she tweets many times a day, sometimes early in the morning. You know, I don't know when she finds the time, but she does find the time. And I think she is a pretty busy person too. So the argument that there is no time for social media, I find it a pretty poor argument compared to how little time in the end is necessary to still be present somehow. I also decided to focus on Twitter, I'm afraid. Sorry about this, but if then there are questions about other social media, I'm happy to answer to questions. And I will just go very briefly on the aspects that in my opinion are useful for Twitter. But probably everybody in this platform already knows about this. You know, it links you up to a community that shares the same interests. You can follow events live because you have a lot of people doing live tweeting during events, and you can see what people take away from conferences and debates that can be important for you. And it also provides traffic to your project website if you have a project website, or in any case, visibility to your publications and other output. So, and this is my key message that I want you to retain from today, because there can be many ways in which academics can be on social media and on Twitter in particular, and obviously what you can tweet and talk about regards your research and your work, your publications and the events that you organize or you participate to. But it's very important that academics do not make the mistake of using social media for self-marketing purposes. To be, maybe that's what Martin meant by narcissist, but in any case, it's when, you know, you have these people who go on social media only when they want to give visibility to their work and they want to say how great their publication is just published is, and they only talk about themselves and their work in a way that is self-referential, because it doesn't call any interaction. And in reality, this is a big mistake, because in the end, the social media work as the real world. Would you like to meet someone and to have a conversation with someone who only wants to talk about their work and how great their work is? I don't think so. And it's the same on social media. So if you want to be on social media, to use the potential of the social media to give visibility to your work, to disseminate your research, then you have to be engaged and you have to be interacting, you have to be giving genuine content that people can be interested in. And that's the key point that I think is important to understand. The social media work in the same way as real life interactions. You have to have something interesting to say, and you have to also be interested in what the others have to say. That's the basic line in the end. So the quality of the content of your posts, of your tweets, or whatever is the most important thing. And finally, I just wanted to mention a few things for people who are not too familiar with Twitter, because there could be initially a bit of a sense of being lost on Twitter, because it's very different from Facebook or other social media where we're in touch with friends or family. Twitter is a place where you can be following other people who don't follow you back, or you have strangers following you, because followers are not friends. And your behavior on Twitter will, in any case, determine how successful you are in terms of followers. If you're not active on Twitter or on social media, you cannot expect to have a lot of followers, but you can still be there and use the potential of the medium. I thought of showing you a few examples. And again, I have Bridget, but maybe I will show you other people from the Schuman community, because just to show you how different people can be on social media. So, is it going there? Let me see. Yeah. So Bernard Hoekman is one of our finest academics at the Schuman Center. He is extremely well known worldwide in global trade and economics. And he opened his Twitter account in 2013, so a long time ago. He has never tweeted one single time. He, nevertheless, is mentioned often. He has more than 300 followers, even though he has never said anything. And probably he just forgot the password in order to delete his account. But in any case, it's just a way to say, you know, maybe he's using Twitter to see what others are saying or doing. He's following Twitter for a feed for information, and that can also be a way. Another one that I wanted to show you, which is pretty peculiar, is Philip van Parijs. Let me see. Yeah, Philip van Parijs, probably everybody here knows him. He's a very well-known, he's a very well-known philosopher. He has almost 8,000 followers, and he follows 18 people. So he has a lot of people following him, and he's not really following back, and he's hardly ever interacting in conversations on Twitter. And still, he has followers because he's an important person, and he does regularly post here to share information. And I'm closing here just because I think it's important to leave space for questions. But what I mainly want to say is that in the end, we can all choose the way this social media can work for us, that there is not one single way. But no matter the way you choose, it's important to be there and to say, to participate in the conversations that happen in these spaces. And voilà, that's all.
I come up from a specific background, and I sort of like made my career out of thinking about research as something that should be as open as possible, and promoting that idea between academics. I come from a library background, but I do have a PhD, and I did research in my life. So the combination of those sort of like made me think about a presentation that is slightly different than the other ones. So let's see how it goes. I hope it's complementary. Oops, let me see. Okay, so let me start with a statement. I'm not going to read it through. This is one of the possible definitions that we have of open science. There are general terms that I hope that many people actually agree with. But what I would like to focus now is that the availability to everyone. So the fact that, it's part of the researcher and academic values that we try to make research results, and in general, what comes out of a research endeavor available to everyone. But everyone really, so there are many barriers actually between, think about opening up your research and making it really available for people. There are, of course, paywalls. Some research is actually maybe people in academia in itself might not realize, but many things that are published are actually available behind paywalls of commercial publishers. And people that work at university might maybe not realize, especially in the Western world, might not realize that, because of course they have access through their libraries to all these kind of resources. But if you think about outside, you, for example, Google something and you hit a paywall. You don't see the actual piece of research. And then, of course, there are other challenges when you think about like communicating to everyone. What about the language? And I'm using language very broadly right now. It's not about like, language like English or Italian or other types of translation. It's actually about the type of language that you use. And you have to think about the audience that you are communicating with. There are laypersons. Most of people around are not expert in specific academic fields. So how would you actually communicate to them something that you feel is important for society? And of course, there's the medium itself, which is, not necessarily the message, but how you actually, what tools you use in order to make your communication effective. And in general, if communication has to happen, we really need the right message and medium for the right audience, which means that if you are used to write for your peers, people in your department, people in your academic community, people that share the language with you, you might not be used to share, to communicate the same kind of content to people that are not part of that community. So these problems really applies to scholarly communication as much as any other type of communication, to be completely fair. I'm sure that, Elena knows about it, but, really, sometimes there's a sense of academia that it's a little bit like a bubble. You think about you think about your content in a way that it's structured for the people that you sort of, in the background of your mind, assume are the ones that are going to be reading that content. So if we take a step back a little bit and you think about social media in academia, and this is actually something that has been mentioned by Martin and Elena as well. This is just a sort of the inward facing perspective. So when you use social media to engage with other academics, so you try, this is sort of a reworking of some of the things that have been already said. So I'm just going to go through them briefly. You try to build a trusted information sharing network where, you get information from outside and you share information between people that are, that you trust as experts in the field. Of course, promote your work, build your online research identity and presence. There were, being on social media is not about the specific content you publish, but it's also how you present yourself. the kind of language you use, how you, for example, how you write your short bio there, what are the kind of information you share. Depending on the platform, that might be very different. Of course, Twitter and the 280 characters has, you need to find the right strategy to do so, but it's part of your online identity, how and what you actually present. You can request for peer comments or engage in more thoughtful conversation about a specific academic topic with your peers. Of course, if you are part of the, the EU-funded projects landscape, working on social media is going to be also part of what you report back. There's a sort of a requirement, especially if you are under grant money, to work in that space, because it's part of what the European Commission considers impact. So this is the inward-facing side. But of course, there's also the outward-facing. When you think about using social media, not to speak to your peers, but to take the perspective of other people. And then, of course, you are trying to reach to a broader audience in society, and maybe try to make your expertise and knowledge available to other people that are not your peers. And that really goes back to what Martin said, and, being active and engaged with politicians. I mean, that's his field, of course, but there are many other aspects. I'm thinking about like the current crisis right now, and the fact that there are virologists and also like medical people that are actually engaged online to share the proper information about what's going on, contribute to open discussions and conversations, fight misinformation. I don't remember, I think it was Elena who mentioned fake news. That's really important, because one of the issues with social media is that you they're open. That's the good and bad. So everybody has seems to have the authority to share whatever they want. And sometimes misinformation spread very rapidly over social media. Well, the last one is just a joke. You want to become an influencer, that's how you go. Actually, in Italy, there's also like a complete online degree on becoming an influencer. It's just something unbelievable. Anyway, I want to just go back a little bit to the barriers that we have right now. There are, oops, this is not properly showing. Well, that's okay. Okay, I don't see what, okay. Well, anyway, how about paywalls? I think that you, let me just try to see if there's any, oops, no. I think you don't see something that I wanted to show you on the slide, but it's not there. So let me try to do something else. Sorry about that. I'll just go back here. Just a second. I'm going to share again. Okay, this is just, let me get rid of this. Sorry, I don't know why it was not popping up exactly. So how about paywalls? And this is sort of the backbone of what you wanted to communicate. If you think that your research is valuable to society, your research should be open. And one way to do it is actually to publish in open access, or have a way of sharing versions of your research results that it's free of like commercial fees or other types of barrier for use. What about language? I mentioned that there are several different types of audiences that you actually would like to reach out, and that might help. Think about like a sort of a chain of communication where you have your tweet, just to give a Twitter example again, that points to a blog post where you actually link the full paper. You might think that those types of messages and way of communicating serve different purposes, and they actually do. So some people might actually stop at the tweet level. Some people might be engaged with your blog post, and some people might actually get to your full paper. But you are really, really trying to have different level of communication for people that might be, at different expert level. What about the medium? Of course, you have a plethora of like online platform that you can think of, and this goes back to the kind of audience you would like to reach. as was mentioned earlier, Twitter is well known in academia, but there are things that happen only on Facebook. I'm not on Facebook anymore, but I know for sure that if you want to reach, for example, down to specific groups of people in the society, they actually meet on Facebook. They are not on Twitter. So depending on the type of public engagement you wish to have, you need to pick the right platform. And of course, you have LinkedIn, which is a professional network, and that's another type of engagement as well. These were just examples. So what I wanted to say is that through this kind of process, what you can possibly achieve is a different kind of impact. I'm sure that everybody who is or has been an academic, has a very big notion of impact. The term impact plays a role there. If that's about impact factor, about H index, other kinds of measure of impact that it's used inside academia. But if you think about sort of like the greater good, and that's really a different kind of impact that you can possibly make. And it's about openness plus it's supporting communication that allows research to be discoverable in a way that would not be otherwise. And also the fact that you in this way you cross the barrier of the academic bubbles and you really have a rich impact outside academia. But of course, as was mentioned several times, that takes dedication. It's not something that happens just by tweeting about your work. It's something that requires building, that requires even trust. It's very important, actually. Trust, building trust between your followers, if you're on Twitter or other platforms as well. It's extremely, extremely important in this kind of conversation. But also, time management. You need to take time to do it, and it might become natural for some people. It's never going to be natural, but still, I believe it's quite important to be done, especially if you would like to be an engaged academic and work in public outreach. So this is kind of my last slide, and it's sort of a call for action at the end, because isn't it the real goal of research to contribute advancing knowledge and better our society? How can you do that if you just don't think about your research as they apply and the kind of impact that they have on the public? And so it's really like, I really thank the engaged academics for the work they do, because it's I think it's really essential in sort of like directing the resources that we have into something that would make a difference. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Simone. Thank you to all of you. We now open up the floor for questions, and actually we already have at least 3 of them. Some participants typed their questions in the chat box, so I will take it that I can just read them out loud. For the next question round, please feel free to either type the question and I will read it for you, your name and your question, or just type your name if you want to ask the question live yourself. So we have Lucas Cardiel asking, can you tell us something about the bio on Twitter, please? The bio on Twitter, please. And Rebecca that asks, so I have the impression that for academics who are established because they have a good network within academics, it is easier to obtain trust from non-academic audiences. Do you agree? Do you have any specific suggestion for early stage researchers? And then I'm going to take a third question from Marina Cascella, who says, my feeling sometimes is that on Twitter, you you get a huge amount of information and it's difficult for your message to pass. I tend to use lists to select channels of information, but it is still difficult to let my messages reach my audience. Any suggestion on this? So on list and in general, I guess, sifting information, maybe hashtags. I will stop there with these three questions, so feel free to reply to either of them.
If you want, I can start with the bio, because it's something that I have studied a bit myself, and I have also changed my own bio on Twitter over time. The bio is a sort of business card, like a virtual business card, but I think on Twitter and on social media in general, it already presents a little bit what kind of feed people can expect if they go on your profile or if they follow you. So I think it's important that you choose what you want to mention in the bio, because it's very limited in terms of space and characters that you can use. And at the same time, it will decide if it will make people decide if they are going to follow you or not. So your title, the research that you work on, or some keywords that are the keywords that represent better your area of expertise can really help in defining your bio. You can also adjust it over time and change it. So it's something that you should always maybe every now and then review and see if it still corresponds, if it still tells what is your identity on that social media platform, on Twitter in particular. If you want, I can continue on the other questions.
Yes, so the other, let me just remind the others what the other two questions were. So the first one is if you have any specific advice for early stage researchers who might not have an established network or maybe an established position. And the other one is about selecting information and also using hashtags to make your message more.
Well, I can pick the first one. I think it's it takes a little bit of time. It doesn't happen in the vacuum. It's something that you build your network. I mean, it's I think that Martin gave a lot of good examples of strategies in terms of how to start. And I think that, once you start following the right people and start engaging in conversation, meaningful conversation, of course, in combination of, making sure that you have yourself, sort of like an active contribution of interesting content there, it's when you actually start building your real network. So you using the Twitter example, you're not just following people, but people start to follow you back. Elena mentioned that the strategy of what to tweet and how to tweet. It's actually extremely important that you don't sort of like promote yourself only. So when you tweet, it's about even making sure that if you think that something is important, that you retweet about it, and maybe you can comment on it, so you actually start a conversation around the original tweet. So there are strategies, but it's not something that happens out of the blue. You build your network in time, and it takes a little bit of dedication, but you don't have to think that you have to be on Twitter all the time. This is not going to work for anyone. But still, you need to be sort of proactive in managing your time there. I think Martin wants.
Please, Martin, yes.
Yeah, I'll take the hashtag question. I don't know if studies have been made, but I don't think people actually have the time to go through hashtags. Now there's a hashtag COVID-19. Who would search information by clicking the Twitter hashtag COVID-19? Nobody. everybody's talking about it. Many are including the hashtag, but that's not the way you get through your own message. I think the best way is to find the really interesting people in your own field and to retweet with a comment. Gradually that will spread. In the best case, those people themselves will realize that this was a smart contribution. I will retweet it. I will share it with my followers, so they will respond. So that's the way you get actually to the people you want to target. It takes time. It takes time, and you need to be patient.
If I can complement what Martin just said, I think it's very important also to comment on others, on other people tweets and posts, because when you comment, your comment will be viewed by the followers of the person you're commenting, and in this way you also get another window of opportunity to be seen, and if you say something interesting, then those people will also find your comment interesting.
Okay, thank you. We have a question from Agnese Perrone, who asks, what, in your opinion, would be the role of academic publishers in social media? And I will add one short question of my own, which is that none of you mentioned Instagram, while it seems to me that it's a platform that is increasingly used by professionals and institutions as well. And a third question, to make it three. It's a question from Lotta Svattenson from the library staff perspective. What do you academics expect from libraries, repositories in particular on Twitter? Something missing, something that you like. So I guess this is for the panel, for Martin, but also for the participants. Thank you. Yes, please, Martin.
From publishers, I expect that they promote our books. And with an active Twitter presence, they can do that in respect of a new book, or they can tweet about each and every chapter over a course of time, and always include the respective author's Twitter handle there, so that people can then self-promote their own work through the publisher's tweet. And from the libraries, I expect roughly the same. That our library would promote our work as EUI academics, but also like inform us about some new important books arriving, or by making virtual collections, like we have now listed resources about topic X, click here. So that kind of tweeting from a library, I think, would be useful.
I can take the question on Instagram. So Instagram is a social media that is very focused on visuals and videos or photos, and it's very much based on aesthetics. So it's for an academic environment, it's used by younger academics in general. The EUI has an Instagram account, and they make very nice posts on our profiling our people, profiling the researchers, profiling our staff, and so on. The Robert Schuman Center, at the time when I arrived, we decided to focus on Twitter more than Instagram, because we think that in the case of our audience, is not necessarily the platform where we would find the interaction that we were looking for. Some programs of the Schuman Center are going more and more into Instagram. It's something that we could decide eventually to do also at the level of the Schuman Center. But for what concerns researchers, of course, it's another medium to be taken into account. And it should be used in a complementary way, in a different way from how we use Twitter or Facebook in any case. And here we go into then, finding maybe a little bit more time to see the peculiarities of the different social media. But Instagram is definitely a very powerful platform where you can also create a network, for sure.
Okay, thank you very much. We have a question. We have an ongoing conversation in the chat box, but I will not read it out loud for time reasons. But we do have a question from Giovanna Gileri. She asks, have you ever met anyone from your virtual network or followers in person after a virtual exchange?
Yes, absolutely yes. It happened several times actually, even with people that you know, you might feel are up there while you are down here or things like that. Having an engagement, a meaningful conversation on Twitter help, because you can always remind them when you see them, for example, and you would like to have a conversation with them at conferences or other places. I am blah blah blah. We had this exchange. It's a icebreaker that you can use also when you get to meet them. So because sometimes you don't know exactly how to start a conversation, that's a nice way to do it. I'm sure other people add this.
I don't think it has ever happened to me, actually.
Really? Okay.
No.
Well, I have encountered several times people who I know from Twitter at conferences. It creates a nice introduction to a colleague when we know each other from Twitter, and then we can easily navigate at the conference. We know where we agree and where we disagree.
We have time for one or two more questions. If anyone would like to jump in at this point?
I can answer to Sergey. Oh, it was a private question. But Sergey asked the question, what kind of tweets trigger hate messages and threats? And my prime example is that if I mention by name a populist politician, such as the leader of the True Finns party in Finland, I get a lot of hate messages through all channels. Because of course my mentions are critical, related to xenophobia and racism. And that is a pretty sure trigger.
Maybe I have a question to this audience myself. I'm curious. I was wondering how many of the people participating here are actually on Twitter. But I don't see many people don't have the video on, so I can't see that. Okay, quite a few people though. Okay, yeah, I see.
Many people are. There might be a selection bias in the group though.
Great, thanks.
I can imagine that.